History is written by the victors, but the most disturbing parts are often left out of the classroom. From biological warfare in the Middle Ages to a war fought over an ear, today we're uncovering 5 secrets that your history teacher skipped. Welcome back to Dark Chronicle Story. In the broader sweep of early 18th century imperial rivalry, a single act of brutality, a severed ear, became the emotional spark that ignited a 9-year global conflict between Britain and Spain, illustrating just how fragile international peace could be when ancient grievances, commercial ambition, and masterful propaganda converged. The origins of the crisis lay in the simmering resentment over the Asiento, the lucrative contract granting Britain the right to supply enslaved Africans to Spanish America, and the rampant smuggling that British merchants carried out in defiance of Spain's rigid colonial trade monopoly. Spanish coast guards, known as guardacostas, patrolled Caribbean waters with a heavy hand, boarding and searching British vessels they suspected of illicit trading. It was during one such tense encounter in 1731 that Captain Robert Jenkins, commanding the brig Rebecca, was stopped near Havana by the Spanish patrol boat La Isabela, under the command of Captain Juan de Leon Fandino. According to Jenkins's later testimony, Fandino had him bound to the mast and personally sliced off one of his ears with a cutlass, sneering that he should present it to King George and tell him the same fate awaited him should he be caught again. 4 years the incident remained little more than a seafarer's bitter anecdote, until Jenkins himself was paraded before a committee of the House of Commons in 1738, where he dramatically produced the severed ear, reportedly preserved in a glass jar or wrapped in cotton, and recounted his ordeal. The timing was no accident. The political climate in London had been inflamed by the South Sea Company's lobbying, by furious merchant interests demanding recompense for Spanish depredations, and by a bellicose opposition led by the likes of William Pitt the Elder, who saw an opportunity to embarrass the cautious Prime Minister Robert Walpole. The image of a British subject mutilated and disgraced became a propaganda masterstroke. Pamphlets, prints, and newspaper articles amplified the story, transforming Jenkins from an obscure traitor into a patriotic martyr and transforming a long-forgotten assault into an unbearable national humiliation that cried out for vengeance. Walpole, who had long pursued a policy of peace through diplomacy, found himself overwhelmed by the drumbeat for war. In October 1739, Britain formally declared war on Spain, a conflict that quickly fused into the wider War of the Austrian Succession, sprawling across the Caribbean, the Mediterranean, and the American colonies. The conflict was far from the tidy retribution the public imagined. Admiral Edward Vernon scored a brief, celebrated victory with the capture of Portobello on the Panamanian coast, but the massive British expedition against Cartagena de Indias in 1741 turned into a catastrophic defeat, devastated by disease, fierce Spanish resistance under Blas de Lezo, and poor coordination. Thousands of British soldiers and sailors perished, and the grand imperial ambitions cooled into a grinding, expensive stalemate. What had begun as a righteous crusade over a severed ear dissolved into a bloody, inconclusive struggle that ended in 1748 with the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle, which restored the status quo and left the underlying commercial tensions largely unresolved. The war's true lesson, however, echoes far beyond its battlefields. It reveals how a single visceral image, skillfully weaponized by interest groups and a bellicose press, can bypass rational statecraft and push nations into devastating conflicts that neither side truly wins. Jenkins's pickled ear was not the cause of the war. The cause lay in decades of economic rivalry, mutual provocation, and imperial ambition, but it provided the kind of emotional accelerant that turns diplomatic crises into holy wrath. The episode stands as a timeless warning that international peace is held together by threads of restraint and perception, and that once propaganda transforms a personal grievance into a symbol of national honor, the machinery of war can roll forward with a terrifying momentum all its own. In the sweltering heat of July 1518, in the city of Strasbourg, then part of the Holy Roman Empire, a woman known as Frau Trophia stepped into a narrow street and began to dance, silently, fervently, and without music, her body twisting and swaying in a compulsive rhythm that she seemed utterly unable to break. What might have been dismissed as a fleeting eccentricity transformed within days into something monstrous. Within a week, over 30 others had joined her, and within a month the number of dancers swelled to as many as 400, moving in a thrashing, trance-like tide through the cobblestone lanes and public squares. They did not dance for joy or celebration. Their faces were twisted with expressions of agony, confusion, and sometimes ecstatic blankness, their feet bleeding through worn shoes as they continued day and night without rest. Contemporary chronicles, including the meticulous notes of the physician Paracelsus and the Strasbourg Council records, describe a scene of profound horror. Men and women flailing until their bones broke through their skin, some collapsing from heart attacks, strokes, or sheer exhaustion, and an unknown number dying from the physical toll of a dance that simply would not end. The city's authorities, interpreting the phenomenon through the twin lenses of medieval medicine and religion, initially believed the path to recovery lay in more dancing, hiring musicians, erecting a stage, and employing professional dancers to tire out the afflicted. A desperate intervention that only exacerbated the mania and increased the death count. Ultimately, the council pivoted to a diagnosis of divine punishment or demonic affliction, banning music, forbidding public dance, and carting the most severe sufferers in wagons to the shrine of St. Vitus in a nearby town, where they were given red shoes, made to walk around a sacred altar, and blessed with holy oil. Gradually, the plague receded as abruptly as it had arrived. The episode has tormented historians and medical thinkers for centuries, crystallizing into two dominant and equally unsettling theories, neither of which can fully explain the grotesque tableau. The first points to ergot poisoning, a condition caused by the consumption of rye bread contaminated with the fungus Claviceps purpurea, which produces alkaloids chemically related to LSD and can induce convulsions, hallucinations, and violent muscle spasms that might mimic dancing. While this biological explanation is attractively tidy, it struggles to account for the sheer duration of the outbreak, the coordinated nature of the dancing, and the fact that ergotism typically restricts blood flow to the extremities and leads to gangrene rather than sustained rhythmic motion. The second, more widely accepted theory is mass psychogenic illness or mass hysteria, in which extreme psychological distress manifests itself physically and spreads through a population by a kind of social contagion, particularly within tightly knit, deeply superstitious communities under enormous strain. The Strasbourg of 1518 was precisely such a crucible. The region had been devastated by famine, crop failures, and outbreaks of syphilis and leprosy. The population lived with a persistent fear of otherworldly punishments and a strong cultural belief in St. Vitus's curse, which legend held could fall upon sinners and compel them to dance as penance. In this reading, Frau Trofia's initial trance was a dissociative response to unbearable misery, and as starving, traumatized onlookers witnessed her ceaseless motion, their own minds produced the same psychosomatic symptoms, a runaway feedback loop of suggestion and desperation that hijacked hundreds of bodies until the physiological limits of the human heart and brain extinguished the most vulnerable among them. The dancing plague endures not merely as a macabre historical curiosity, but as a chilling mirror reflecting the deep, disturbing power of the human mind to break free from rational control and to spread its fractures like a contagion across a terrified society. Beneath the veneer of Japan's wartime empire, hidden in the frozen plains of occupied Manchuria, a sprawling secret complex known as Unit 731 conducted some of the most sadistic and systematic human experiments in modern history, yet its horrors have often been expunged from standard schoolbooks, overshadowed by the more widely taught atrocities of the European theater. Under the command of the chillingly ambitious microbiologist Lieutenant General Shiro Ishii, the unit operated in the city of Harbin from 1936 onward as an assembly line of death masked as a lumber mill or epidemic prevention laboratory, its true purpose the development of biological and chemical weapons through unfathomable cruelty. Its prisoners, thousands of Chinese, Korean, Mongolian, and Russian civilians and captives, along with a smaller number of Allied POWs, were dehumanized as maryuta or logs, a bureaucratic euphemism that reduced living human beings to expendable experimental material. Inside the Pingfang facility, men, women, and children were subjected to vivisections without anesthesia so surgeons could observe how infection spread through convulsing organs. Limbs were frozen solid and then thawed to study frostbite, the flesh hammered to test when bone would shatter. Prisoners were hung upside down to measure how long it took to choke on their own blood, and plague-infested fleas were deliberately unleashed in chambers to trigger aerosolist outbreaks of bubonic plague, anthrax, and cholera. Ishii's ambition did not stop at laboratory walls. He pushed for field tests, sending low-flying planes to drop ceramic bombs filled with plague-ridden fleas on Chinese cities like Ningbo and Changde, sparking epidemics that killed tens of thousands of civilians indiscriminately. By the time the war ended, an estimated 3,000 to 12,000 people had perished directly under Unit 731's scalpel and syringe, and potentially 200,000 more died from the biological attacks it launched. The darkest postscript to this chapter is not merely that it happened, but that its architects walked free. As the Allies swept into occupied territories, the United States struck a secret and deeply morally compromised deal. In exchange for exclusive access to Unit 731's data, gathered through the same torture that international law considered unforgivable, the American occupation authorities granted Ishi and his top researchers full immunity from war crimes prosecution. The Soviet Union held trials in Khabarovsk and convicted some lower-ranking members, but the masterminds vanished into comfortable post-war lives, some becoming pharmaceutical executives, professors, and advisors to the Japanese medical establishment, their knowledge of frostbite and bacteriological warfare absorbed into American military research during the Cold War. This erasure from public memory was deliberate, leaving a gaping hole in the historical record that successive Japanese governments have only awkwardly and partially acknowledged. The story of Unit 731 is a heavy, dark segment of your Dark Chronicle theme precisely because it shatters the comfortable narrative that history is a tidy march of heroes and villains. It forces us to confront the unnerving reality that the pursuit of knowledge can become the most monstrous of alibis, that geopolitical convenience can smother justice, and that entire systems of brutality can be buried not by accident but by design, leaving only ghosts to remind us that the victor's archives are not the whole truth. Among the gleaming marble columns and disciplined legions of the Roman Empire lay a hygiene routine so profoundly alien to modern sensibilities that it triggers an almost visceral revulsion: the widespread, systematic, and entirely unapologetic use of human urine as a cleaning agent, a teeth whitener, and even a medicine. The Romans had observed, with their characteristic practical empiricism, that aged urine possessed a remarkable pungency and cleansing power, a phenomenon we now understand as the breakdown of urea into ammonia, a potent alkaline compound capable of dissolving grease, bleaching fabrics, and scrubbing away stubborn stains. In the city's bustling fooleries or philonicae, workers would soak enormous vats of soiled tunics and togas in diluted, fermented urine, then trample them underfoot in a process that functioned as an ancient dry-cleaning operation, the ammonia cutting through body oils and sweat to restore wool to a pristine whiteness. The same caustic property made urine a popular, if eyebrow-raising, cosmetic. Roman poets and satirists, including Catullus, mocked the inhabitants of Hispania for their habit of polishing their teeth each morning with their own aged urine. Yet the practice was sufficiently widespread that wealthy citizens would import Portuguese urine in sealed amphorae specifically for dental grooming, believing it to be the most effective solution for a dazzling smile. Nor did this stop at vanity. The medical texts of Pliny the Elder and Dioscorides prescribed fresh urine as a topical treatment for burns, chapped skin, and sores, as a warm gargle for throat ulcers, and as an ear wash for infections, banking on the trace amounts of urea and antimicrobial compounds that would, many centuries later, be synthesized into modern dermatological creams. The Roman state, ever inventive in the art of taxation, built an entire economic structure around the urine trade, establishing rows of large clay dolia, public urinal pots, positioned at street corners and outside the laundries, where passersby could relieve themselves in a civic service that doubled as a raw material donation. Emperor Vespasian, who ruled during the 1st century AD and inherited an empire teetering on bankruptcy, famously imposed the vectigal urini, a urine tax levied on the fooleries that collected the liquid from public latrines and the great sewer system, the Cloaca Maxima. When his son Titus recoiled in disgust at the source of the revenue, Vespasian held a gold coin to his nose and asked whether it smelled, coining the immortal aphorism pecunia non olet. Money does not stink. A testament to a worldview that saw resources where others saw only filth. This cultural frontier between the practical and the repulsive is precisely what makes the Roman urine economy a segment of such captivating horror and humor for modern audiences. It juxtaposes the grandeur of the empire with a bodily reality that contemporary society has sanitized and hidden behind bathroom doors, and it forces us to confront how much of our disgust is culturally conditioned rather than biologically hardwired. The lesson lands with the punch of a perfectly timed gross-out fact because it reveals that even the most sophisticated civilizations can embrace habits that feel like a descent into nightmare, reminding us that history is not a straight line of progress but a strange, aromatic, and occasionally gag-inducing journey through the minds of people who, like us, thought they were the pinnacle of cleanliness and common sense. In 1587, 115 English men, women, and children, including Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the Americas, established a fragile foothold on Roanoke Island off the coast of what is now North Carolina. Their governor, John White, sailed back to England for supplies just days after his granddaughter's birth, expecting a swift return. Instead, the outbreak of war with Spain trapped him across the Atlantic for 3 agonizing years. When White finally stepped back onto the island in 1590, he found a settlement utterly deserted, not destroyed. Houses had been carefully dismantled rather than burned, heavy artillery and personal possessions left behind, a chest of books buried and ruined by rain, and no sign of the single agreed-upon distress signal. No Maltese cross carved anywhere. On a tree at the entrance to the settlement, someone had cut the letters Sorrow, and on a nearby post, the full word Croton. To White, this was a deliberate message. The name of a nearby island, then home to the friendly Hatteras tribe, suggesting the colonists had relocated peacefully. Yet searches were thwarted by a hurricane, and the colony slipped into legend, sparking centuries of debate over whether the settlers were absorbed into the Croton people, moved further inland, or met a darker and unrecorded fate. The absence of bodies, battle debris, or a single incontrovertible clue has made Roanoke the ultimate historical ghost story, a void that invites viewers to pour their own theories into the silence. A perfect, unsettling puzzle with no solution except the one carved into a tree. History is full of shadows, and these 5 stories are just the tip of a vast and sunless iceberg drifting silently beneath the surface of everything we think we know. From a pickled ear that set the world on fire, to a dancing mania that consumed bodies and souls, to the hidden torture chambers of Unit 731, to the urine-soaked smile of an empire, and finally to an entire colony that dissolved into the forest, leaving only a single word carved in bark. Each of these dark chronicles reminds us that the past is not a tidy museum diorama, but a haunted house with doors that still creak open. Which of these secrets shocked you the most? Or do you have a theory about Croton, about what really happened in Strasbourg, about any of the ghosts we've stirred tonight? Let us know in the comments below. Your insights and theories are what turn this channel into a community of fellow explorers, piecing together the fractured mirror of yesterday. And if you love uncovering the hidden, the unsettling, and the genuinely strange side of our past, hit that subscribe button right now for Dark Chronicle Story. Ring the bell, because there are so many more mysteries waiting in the dark. See you in the next one.